All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at Gnomon's live stream for our event from pre-production to post, the creative pipeline of a 3D generalist with Sonja Christoph. My name is Adam Hartel, and I am a recruiter at Gnomon. It's with great honor that I'm able to introduce our guest to you tonight. But before I introduce her, I'd like to thank Lenovo for sponsoring tonight's event. Lenovo helps us to continue to bring free educational events to you. With that said, I'd like to now introduce our guest. Sonja Christoph is a 3D generalist and matte painter who kickstarted her career at Rhythm and Hues, followed by the Mill and Industrial Light and Magic. During her 4 years at Industrial Light and Magic, she also worked on several VR projects with IMX Lab, one of which, Carne y Arena, won a Rare Special Awards Oscar. Sonja has also worked on film, TV, commercials, theme park rides, VR, and most recently, AAA games. Her credits include Millennium Falcon, Smugglers Run, Doctor Strange, Tomorrowland, Agent Carter, Carne y Arena, Adidas, Climawarm, and Division 2. So with that, Sonja, welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Hi.
All right. You are tuning in. You're coming to us all the way from Sweden, correct?
That's correct. It
Wonderful.
is 4:30 in the morning.
Wow. Thank you so much for being at this hour for the rest of us here. I'm just going to turn it over to you to take it away. And I'll be here to take questions from the chat. I've got my colleagues, Ray and Miranda, in the chat room, and they're going to be scouting out questions from you guys. And I'll try to pepper the presentation, Sonja, with a few questions from our audience. And then towards the end, we'll be able to get a lot more questions out there. So yeah, take it away, Sonja. Thank you.
Awesome. Sounds good. So thank you for joining me. And I thought I'd walk you guys through two of my personal projects today, step by step. That will be the first part of this talk. And then for the second part, we'll talk about software. And I'll tell you a little bit about which software I like to use and why. Now, mind you, those will be my personal preferences and opinions. You don't... it's really up to you to use whatever you feel comfortable in. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that you create awesome art. Really, that's the bottom line. That's what we're here for, right? So, let's get started. So I figured we start off talking a little bit about the process, and I'll walk you through, like I said before, some of my personal projects. And the very first step before you start a personal project is you need to have an idea, right? Now, where do you come up with ideas? Like where does your inspiration come from? And I think for me, honestly, I think inspiration can come from anywhere, like literally anywhere, because it's all around you. I mean, if I look at my office right now, it's great inspiration for clutter. It's really awesome for that at the moment. So, it can come from nature. It can come from art. It can come from, something that you feel, something that you hear. It can be so many different things that inspire you. I think one of the ones that also is really important is personal experiences. It's personal experiences are just they're innately, in its word, personal, and that makes them more relatable. People can relate to it. They can feel, they can instantly connect to your work, and that's really nice. That's very important. And if sometimes you have a hard time coming up with anything, if you're stuck and you can't think, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Think about what happened to you today. Maybe you saw something funny. Maybe we're fighting pigeons right now on our balcony because. They like to take over our balcony and build a nest there. And we did that last year, and I'm still trying to clean my balcony since then. Things like that. Those can be little stories that can inspire you to create something out of it. So that's just a little bit about inspiration. And I thought I'd pull up a couple of my work and I'd talk a little bit about what inspired me for these. So the very first example I'm going to talk about is this image here. And this is, we had just gotten a drone, and I was terrified of losing it. So that's where that one came from. And if you look at the style, it's a bit more painterly. It's a little bit more stylized. in the proportions and obviously in the texture. And that actually was inspired by the amazing background paintings from Tech on Concrete. And I hope I'm not butchering that that name. But it's just amazing, amazing work. And you can see the colors are beautiful. And you can actually, if I zoom out a little bit, you can very clearly see how the colors inspired my piece up here. You can sort of see that, I took some of the inspiration from the grass tufts along the sidewalk here, and that sort of, I carried that over into my piece over here. So this is just one example of how other artwork, can sort of inspire maybe a style or a color palette. Now let's move on to the next one. This is my Reactor scene. And this one was actually inspired or came from me playing The Fallen Order. The very first level, I played, the shipyard. And I love that feeling. I love that industrial feeling. It was just a really cool, gritty environment, a little dirty. But there were no people around there. And you felt really isolated. You felt like you had the secret and you couldn't really, you were kind of alone. And I liked that feeling, and I kind of wanted to capture that feeling. So if I zoom out, you can see very different to the first example that I showed you guys. I'm not using any of the same. It's a completely different color palette. So it's really more about capturing the spirit of, being alone in a really vast industrial space. So that's what inspired this one. And then let's talk a little bit more about personal experience. And that's my little robot series. And that's very clearly COVID inspired by recent events. This down here was my work attire for many weeks in the home office, longer than I care to admit. And I think we all know what this one is. I don't think it matters in which country you are. I think everybody went out and bought toilet paper. It's insane. I don't know why. And this was a little story here where we were actually in quarantine because my better half was actually sick, and we didn't know whether he had it or not. So we couldn't go anywhere for 2 weeks. We were running out of groceries. And my friend Sandra dropped off some essentials for us, bread, milk, and chocolate. Very important, very essential. And then this is obviously inspired by Italy. But yeah. So personal experiences can make for some great little story moments. And they're nice. They're fun. All right, so we have an idea for this project. The idea I had was I actually wanted to use my little robot, and the idea was that he took out his dad's spaceship for a joyride, and he crashed on Earth, somewhere out in the desert. And there's this lone phone booth by the side of the road, and he wants to call back home. So that was sort of the idea I had for a personal project that I wanted to work on. Now, the next thing before I go on to actually start the project, so idea first, and then I actually think about a purpose. Like, why am I doing this project? Why am I spending time? Why am I doing this? And time is something that, honestly, it's the most precious thing that we have. We can't get more. And we also don't know how much we have. So, trying to be as efficient as we can with our time is something at least I always try to do. So when I do a personal project in my spare time outside of work, why am I doing it? Am I trying to learn something new? Am I trying to practice something? Am I trying to get better at something? What is it? For this project, I wanted to do a stylized character, which, to be honest, I had never done before. So this is actually a concept by my better half. So many thanks to him. So he did this little awesome concept art for me. That was the base for the character, for the little robot that you saw. And then I wanted to get back into Unreal. I hadn't worked in Unreal in a while. So I was craving it. I wanted to work in it again. So I'm like, all right, let's do an Unreal project next. And then I just wanted to focus a little bit more on storytelling. So that was those were kind of my three pillars, my three ideas and purpose for this personal project. All right, we have the idea, we have a purpose. let's start with references. And I'm sure you're tired about hearing about this, but references are so important. Our brain just can't handle that much information. So references are the base of everything. Every project that I start on, everything, you just start with references first. And I like to use PureRef to organize my scene. I'm actually using it even for this presentation right now, which is something different. I'm just trying it out. And what I like about it is that, you can just drag and drop images in. I can easily scale them. I can rotate them. I can even take all of these. I can align them. If I can find the thing here, there we go. Arrange. You can do optimal arrangement. So you can really do a lot of things with this. You can arrange them by height, by name, however you want. It's just a great way to really keep your reference board organized and have everything in one spot, which I think is really great because I don't waste any time digging through folders to find what I want. So yeah, PureRef, also super affordable. It's basically donation based, so I highly recommend it. There are other softwares out there. This is just the one that I happen to use. All right, got the references. Let's move on to planning. And planning, I think, is important if you have a project that has more assets. I think that's an important part of it because you need to be able to track what you're doing. Especially if you're working and you don't have the time to continuously work on a project from start to finish in one sitting. Sometimes I have to put it down for a couple weeks at a time. So it's nice to just pull something up, and I'll show you an example of this right now. It's nice to just pull something up, and then you can see where things are. So I'd like to use Trello for that. Trello is free. You can sign up online. And what I like about it is that I can really simply create a column like this, and I can add text to it here. I can add quickly things like this, and then, I can color code these if I want. I can move things around really easily. I can add additional information in here if I want to. I can even add an image if I wanted to. And yeah, I just like that it's very flexible, it's very fluid, it's easy to use, and I can immediately see where things are. Now, this is actually the example for the project that I'm talking about today. And, you can see how I'm using it. I broke it down into models, into decals, into effects, and then I'm going to get rid of this real quick. And then a polish pass needed. And this column is sort of a reminder for me if I'm working on something and I'm like, the glass shader is not looking as good as it could be. So then I just add a little note in here as a reminder. I'm like, I know it's not perfect. I'll come back to it. So that's how I like to use this column here. Now for this project, I used a lot of tileable textures, so I didn't need to create any really additional tileable textures. If I had to, I would have added an extra category here. And the color coding, that's how I like to track where things are. So, green for me is the blockout, yellow means that the modeling is done, and then purple, it means that it's textured and the asset is completely finished. Now, the reason why this is nice, because I can let me just turn this off. Immediately when I come back to my project, I can look at this and be like, oh, this is all done. This needs to be textured. So it's a really fast way of seeing where you are in your progress, in your project, what needs to be done. I can see, if I have maybe 2 hours in the evening, I can be like, I don't have time for modeling, but I have time for texturing. What can I do? So it's just a really good way of tracking it. Also, it's, if you're doing this on a deadline, like if you're doing a project for a talk, for a presentation, whatever it might be, you can very quickly see if you're on track to finishing on time or not. And if you're not, then obviously you can reassess and maybe scope down your amount of work. But yeah, so this tool, I think, is a great way of doing that. It's just easy, free, and very flexible. So that's why I like to use it. All right. Planning. So we have our plan. We're moving on. It's time to actually do some 3D. And first step is doing some blockouts. And for the blockouts, I like to keep them as simple as possible. I don't want to spend any time on them. No UVs. You can see the basket is just a cube. The phone booth, now that's a hero asset, and I knew it was going to be a hero asset. And that one I spent a little bit more time on defining the individual pieces and the proportions, especially because if we go back to our reference, bear with me, here it is. You see those panels? Well, my robot is pretty small, so I want to make sure that you can actually see the robot. So for me, it was important that I get this piece in and these lines in here so I can really dial in my composition and really figure out where those lines need to be so that you can still see the robot, from the different angles that I want to show him from. So that's why I spent a little bit more time on that blockout. Usually I don't. These were Quixel Megascan assets. If I had to do a blockout for them, it'd be a cube, it'd be a cylinder, really simple. This was a tire from a previous project that I'd done. That's why that one is finished. But yeah, just to give you an example, manhole cover, very simple. Cylinder, road is a plane. Keep it, simple, quick, fast. The tree was done in Speed Tree. These assets came from Quixel Megascans, except for the bush. And I'm picky when it comes to bushes. I think for a bush to look just right, they need to cluster a certain way. So I actually prefer to do those by hand. So that one, I actually did, because I needed to see the scale and how big it is and how it feels in the scene. But at the end of the day, those were sort of the blockout meshes that I had, and I tried to balance it. I tried to not do too many. Not too little, not too many. It's really, this stage is all about trying to figure out how many assets do I need to tell the story and to support the story. I don't want to take away from the story. It's a dance. Just try to find the golden middle way there. And then I go into Unreal and I start laying things out. At this point, I'm just, like I said, like I talked about before, I'm like, phone booth side of the road. Let's maybe curve the road a little bit. Let's throw in some mountains in the back, crash spaceship somewhere. All right, let's just throw this out there and let's see what it looks like. And that's the next step, actually. We're going to go into setting up the cameras. Crazy important. This is how your project will be seen in the end. So setting up cameras, figuring out my angles is actually one of the very first things that I do. Because again, it is so important. It's so crucial. And if I don't have enough good angles to show from my project, then I need to readjust my layout. And I'd like to do that as soon as possible. So this is the very first thing I do. And I start off with the hero shot first. I call it like my hero shot. That's sort of the cover. It's a cover art, if you want to think of it that way. And that's important. What I want, the key points I need to hit for this to be a hero shot is it needs to be able to tell the story in a single view. So my story, like we talked about, is crashed spaceship, desert area, lone country road, phone booth, robot calling for help. Those are like my key elements, and they all need to work and exist in one frame. So after I have the hero shot, then honestly, it's just about flying around and trying different things, and then change the focal length, pull the camera up, pull the camera down, change aspect ratios, go vertical, go square for Instagram, whatever you want to do, try all those different things out to make sure that you have a lot of different angles. And that's actually a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I get that in a lot of student portfolios where, there's this beautiful 3D scene, but I only get one screenshot. And I'm like, why? It's a 3D scene. You spend so much time on this. Show me different angles. And especially if you want to work in games, your environment has to work from all angles. It has to work. So, why are you not show more angles, basically? That's my bottom line. Just show it off. Show off the work you put into it. Fly around, find those good angles. And if you really do feel like you only have one good angle, maybe tweak the layout a little bit. There's more. All right, let's move on before I get too sidetracked here. So set up the cameras. Next one up is lighting. And that is super important. So For lighting, how I approach lighting is I usually start off with the sky first. The sky is everything in an outdoor scene. It dictates your time of day, your mood, your bounce light, so many things. So sky, super important. Get that in first. And then I move on to the practical lights. Practical lights, what I mean when I say that is basically your street lights is, basically all the lights that are realistically that you've placed in your scene. The phone booth, for example, they have an overhead lighting, so I turn that on. So that's my second step. I turn on all those lights. And then the final step is I actually go in and art direct my lighting. And that's where I go in and I might place like a light here to add a little bit more bounce on his face. I might add another light in here to really give this, cast some light onto the plants here to make it feel like the light is streaming out of the phone booth. All those kind of things. What's important about that, and you'll actually notice that I'm still in grayscale at this point. And I want to be in grayscale at this point. I don't want to see any textures or any colors besides the sky. That's the only exception I'm willing to make, is because it's just like drawing. When you do a drawing, you have to make sure that your values work, that your focal points are supported by your values, by your lighting, all those things. It's the base of creating a successful artwork piece. So I'm applying those same principles from drawing into this 3D artwork. I want to make sure that my lighting works, that it supports my focal points, that it reads properly, and that the values work. That I have a good value balance from lights versus darks. All those things I want to work out at this stage. I don't want to do this later because if later on, once you have colors added to it, it becomes harder to sort of to judge it properly. So right now is the time to do it, because if it doesn't work now, it's not going to work later, and your image is not going to be as successful as it could have been had you done this step now. So that's why I'm doing it. Just a couple different angles just to make sure, again, it works from all different angles. So lighting, all right. And now actually, if you think about it, we have our layout, we have our cameras, and we have our lighting. We've pretty much figured everything out at this point. Now it's really just all about finishing the assets. So the hard part for me at this project, like all the difficult things to sort of sort out are done. Now it's just put on the headphones, put in some music, and just, get into the zone and finish everything. And that's exactly what the next step is. It's modeling the final assets. And from the screenshot, you can see I like to use Blender. We'll talk about Blender later. Lots to talk about Blender. But yeah, so I'll just go in and finish the assets. Now, if you wonder to what kind of finish level I like to take the assets, it really depends on the final output. It depends on whether I want to use things like a trim sheet or edge decals. All those kind of things, or if I just want to use the high-res model, if I want to do unique textures, if I want to use tileable textures, all those things, all those decisions sort of influence to what kind of level I take my models to. And usually, though, I kind of keep them in the mid-range. I don't usually do very low res. I usually don't do very high res meshes. I just try to keep it manageable. So a good medium in between, I think, is where I'm personally happiest. I think it's keeps also the scene size down and makes it easier to work with as well. So,
hey Sonja, we've got a quick question for you from the chat.
Yeah.
X Wooden Fox wants to know, is the sky an HDR image?
Yes.
From your lighting scenario. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, always. Yeah. So, all right. So after we've done the final assets, we've done the modeling, then we go to texturing. For texturing, I love Substance. That's what I use at home. It's easy to use. It's fast. It's great. There's a lot of materials out there. I think the important thing to remember with, procedural tools like this is procedural is a great way to start. But then make sure that you go in and paint on top of that. It's add that personal touch, add that, human imperfection, just to elevate your assets to that one extra step. So, yeah. Not much more to say about that. Substance Painter, Substance Designer. We'll talk a little bit about it more later on, but I think it's pretty, at least in the game industry, it's pretty standard. I think in film, it's starting to come more and more. I actually did use it on Doctor Strange. I was one of the first ones to test it on that. That was fun. All right, so texture, look dev, and then if you think about it, we've done actually pretty much, our assets are done, they're already placed, so then it's just time to update them, and then it's time to do a little bit of post-processing. And if this scene was done in Unreal, so I like to do all my post-processing in Unreal. It's great for that. You have a lot of, you can do custom LUTs, which is exactly what I used for this one. Yeah, everything is right there. It's great to use. So that's what I do. You can see this one before post-processing. You can see this is the image after. So I've applied some color grading to it. I've done some exposure tweaks. I've added a little bit of bloom. I've cranked up the AO a little bit, and I've added a bit of a vignette. So those are a couple of the things that I've done in this particular image here, at least. And let's see. Well, let's kind of talk about this one. One thing I think to maybe talk about is if you have an image that's quite dark, kind of like this is pretty dark, make sure to check it on different monitors. It's so easy to, just dial it in on your computer like, oh, yes, it looks awesome. And then you look at it on your phone or on somebody else's monitor and you're like, oh, crap, it's so dark. I can't see anything. Shoot. So then you have to go back and you have to adjust it. So that's happened to me more than once, so I'm just going to mention it here. When you do personal work that's a little bit darker, or any kind of work really, just double check it on multiple sources to make sure you can still see things and it's not just completely pitch black. So something to keep in mind. And these are just a couple of final images from that project. There's my little spaceship here, the phone booth. See the Gnomon sign? Little shout out. Yeah. See it, you guys? Adam, you see it?
I'm looking. Oh, I see it. Yeah.
Right there.
Awesome. Very cool.
A little shout out.
You went to Gnomon, right?
I did. Yeah, I graduated in 2012.
Awesome.
Yeah. It keeps getting better. Every time I come back, there's new labs and everything, and it's amazing. Yeah. So different angles that you can see. Yeah, cool. So those are all the steps I did for this project here. Now this is, there's several steps, all the planning and all that stuff. Those are all steps I do if it's a scene that has more assets to kind of keep track of, things like that. Now, if it's a smaller scene, and I'll walk you through that right now, then I skip some of those because I don't really need to. So the next project we're going to talk about, let me get to it. Where are we? This one. So I'm going to walk you guys through this project. And this one, like I said, I skipped a couple steps. Not the references, though, as we talked about. Super important. Those references have to be there. But then I actually go towards modeling the final assets. That's my next step. And the reason for that, it's basically the scene is made out of 3 assets, really. A couple more, but really not that much. So we've got the reactor, which is 1 asset. Even though it's a huge asset, it's still only 1 asset. The stairs and my character. I don't need a board to track that. That's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. So I just jump right in and model it, get it done with, and then we set up the cameras. And you may have noticed, if you're software savvy, that I actually switched over to 3ds Max. So I did the modeling in Blender, exported out the FBXs, brought them into 3ds Max. And the reason for that is that I wanted to use V-Ray as a renderer. I wanted to use ray tracing because I really wanted to get some nice volumetric effects. I wanted to really art direct the lighting, and V-Ray is just great for that. So I was like, all right, let's do that. Move over. Here we go.
Quick question for you, Sonja, from the frames that we just finished up.
Yeah.
If you don't mind us backtracking.
No,
Terran7 from the chat just wanted to know about how long did it take to render each of those frames that you showed us?
Which ones?
The phone booth.
The phone booth. Well, that's real time. I mean, that's real time. That's Unreal.
Right.
So it's just a screenshot.
Yep.
Yeah. So nothing there.
Excellent.
That's real time. It's nice. It's nice.
And then you just talked about volumetrics. I'm curious about, kind of the differences that you're finding between V-Ray and the volumetric effects that you can now get in Blender, in Evee and in Cycles.
They are great. They're just, I think they work fantastic for, maybe exploring and like previous, for previous scene. I think they're great for that. I just think for a final beautiful beauty render shots, V-Ray is still it's still better at this point. And I mean, yes, I know you can get a very good quality out of Cycles, which is the ray trace render in Blender. But from my experience, V-Ray is just so much faster. So it's just so much faster. And I've worked with V-Ray for many years now. It's amazing. I've worked with it in production. It never fails. It always delivers. It's flexible. You can dial things in. It's just great. It's a great piece of software.
Cool.
So like we talked about, cameras, setting up cameras, flying around, same thing. See if you can find some interesting shots. Up, down, all those things. Once I have my cameras locked down, I'm happy with my layout. Then we move on to the lighting, like we talked about before. And this is an interior scene, so no sky on this one, but I do set up my dome light first. And that's just to get my ambient working, to make sure that feels good. And then we go on to the practical lights, which is the hot core in the reactor. And then I knew I wanted to have some small sort of accent lights around it. This is like, basically one of my focal points. It's the first thing you see when you look at the shot. So I wanted to make sure it draws all the attention that it needs. And once those things are done, then I added my key light. And we can maybe go over here. You can see it a little bit better. So my key light is the one that's casting these interesting sort of shadow patterns. And for that, I'm using just a gobo. Basically, I'm just using an image in front of the light to break up the light and create some interesting patterns. Now, as you can see here, what was important for me, the focal point, this is the first thing that draws your attention. And then, I wanted to make sure that I have a bright hotspot right behind my character, just to create a lot of contrast, so my character doesn't get lost in the scene. Because he is rather small, so I want to make sure that I bump up the contrast to make that a focal point. So yeah, lighting figured out, camera set up. Let's finish it up. Modeling's done, so we just go right into texturing. And the texturing for this is actually super simple. These are actually all the materials that I used for it. It's very straightforward. Another I should mention that. Another reason for dialing in your cameras and your lighting so early in the process is because now I know exactly what's going to be seen and what's in shadow. So I can really figure out, back to that time management thing. I can really decide what to spend my time on, what I don't need to spend time on, and I can really just adjust the priorities of things that way. So yeah, basic materials. It doesn't even have like a breakup to the spec or anything. It's just because you don't really see it. It's not really that important. This is all the materials for the character, for the stairs, and then for the rest of the environment, it's really just two materials with a tileable texture and then a procedural dirt on top of it. And I like to use rich dirt. We'll talk about that a little bit later on when we get to the software part. But that's really, honestly, literally it. And so once I've applied those, then I render out my different passes, and then I move on to post-processing. I figured I'll walk you through that entire step in here because I did it in Photoshop, so I can actually show you every single step. So I have my layers, but I actually start off with the RGBA to start with. Everything is there. I just want to add layers on top of it and tweak things as I go. Next step up, I'm using my Z-depth pass, and I use that to sort of darken down. The further away you get from our foreground, I start to darken down the midtones. I just want to bring the whole atmosphere down a little bit. Then I apply my atmosphere. And actually I think I colorized that a little bit to already push that towards the yellow hue that I wanted. Then Then I added a bloom to these little LED lights. And the way I like to do that is I take the self-illumination pass, I blur it, I color it a little bit, and then I take another copy of the self-illumination pass, I desaturate it, and I color dodge that on top. So you have the hot core and then a little bit of a bloom underneath it. And that's kind of exactly what I did here. You can kind of maybe go back to you can kind of see the difference from straight up render to like how I colorized it and adjusted it and just gave it a little bit of that bloom. Not much, just a little bit, because if you do too much also that can break the scale of your image, and this is a very large environment.
Quick question for you coming in from the chat. Our Victor Cardozo is just curious about why you like to use Blender if Maya and 3ds Max are being used so much in the industry.
I'll get to that, and I'll show you why.
Okay.
Blender has some awesome tools. And yeah, be careful. Blender is creeping into the workplace too, so watch out. All right, so let's go back to post-processing. For this step, so I added a multiply layer on the bottom here, just applied a little bit of a gradient, and that's just to ground the frame on the bottom. It felt a bit floaty. Over here, I added a fake bloom to my hot core, and that's just a soft brush, just painted it in a little bit. Then I do my color grading, and that sort of concludes like the basic color adjustments that I do. Now, after this, I basically merged everything down and applied a little bit of a sharpen filter to it. Again, not too much, just a little bit. For this piece, I really wanted to have that a little bit of a gritty feeling to it. I wanted you to sort of feel, the particles. I wanted to feel a little bit more retro. So sharpening up a little bit can help with that. Then I did, it got a little bit bright in this area here, so I took the midtone and I pulled it down a little bit, darkened it up. And then I applied just a texture over everything to add that noise that I just talked about, get that gritty feeling into it. Also make it feel like the air is heavy and you can feel the dust particles. And then I think at the very last step I did is I actually painted in a little bit of those, dust particles, a little bit of speckles into my fake bloom that I painted in before, because it felt very digital here, and I just wanted to break that up a bit. So that's what I did in here, and that was pretty much it. So that was the whole post-processing from texturing to the final product, and yeah, there you go. So I think this is So now we talked about 2 projects. I walked you through different approaches to both of them. And are there any other questions, actually, I might want to just throw out there? Adam?
Sure. Yeah, we've got one that just came in from Speak Thunder. Their question is oriented towards the depth of field render or pass. Did you use that? Because it seems like you didn't. And if you didn't, why didn't you use that?
I use depth of field based on which camera lens I use, right? So it's actually, let me go back out. Where is it? So I use depth of field on this one here. You can see the foreground is blurred. So I used it so in this shot I did use it. This is more wide angle, so no, I didn't use it for that. So it's really based on the camera lens that I'm choosing. And a lot of times for these establishing shots, it's a wide angle lens, and you wouldn't really see that. If I did that, it would mess with the scale, and it would feel like a miniature scene. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
All right. If there are no other questions, then should we move on to talk about software?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, cool. So I figured I'll start off with 2D tools first, and then we'll jump to 3D. So let's start with 2D first. Obviously, we're going to talk about Photoshop. Not too long because it's an industry standard. Everybody uses it. It's when it comes to photo manipulation, I will say it's still the most used. It's still the best tool out there for pulling mats or anything like that. I think it's still amazing. It can do great things. Gives you a lot of control. So definitely, especially for matte painting, it's a great tool for that. And like I mentioned, industry standard. Every studio uses it. But if you're a freelancer and you are trying to, you're trying to watch your purse, your budget, there is another software out there that is very close to Photoshop, and that's Affinity Photo. Now, it is very similar to Photoshop. It can use a lot of the same things. I've used it at home. The only area I will say that I found it's maybe not quite as good as Photoshop is when it comes to the selection tools. Now, when you do matte paintings, that's kind of very important. So that's something you have to sort of figure out and decide. But the reason why I'm bringing it up here is just because if you are a freelancer and you have a limited budget available, this is a pretty good alternative for a much cheaper price. So that's why I just want to bring it up. Obviously, Photoshop still is the go-to. It's awesome. So yeah. And then I want to talk about Clip Studio Paint. Now, Clip Studio Paint, I don't know if you're that familiar with it. I came across it recently, and it's pretty awesome. It's been around for a while. It's used for comics. It's used for all kinds of different things. And the reason why I like it, and I'm actually going to see if I can pull this up and show you. The reason why I like it is because of the brush quality. Now, this is a super deep program. It has a 3D part to it. You can pose characters and you can paint over them. All that stuff. It has like a comic book layout thing. I don't even know. I haven't even gotten this deep into it. It's a deep program. There's a lot of things to it. I just use it to draw and to paint. And the reason why I like it so much is because of the brushes. The brushes are just really, really awesome. They have it feels like butter. It's like I'm barely touching anything. It just feels really, really good. They have great, these are just the pencil brushes, has great inking pens as well. I think, these are actually all standard. They all come with it. So these are all awesome. And then in particular, let me go to, so it's not just the feel of them. It's also how they blend. They blend incredibly nice. So this is just some of the watercolor brushes. And it's so much fun. And you can see it's just a really nice blending in between. You can start to see this here. It's just so nice. It starts to feel like traditional paint a little bit. And you can even get the watery brush on top of that. So it feels really, really nice. It feels really traditional. You feel like you're pushing paint around. Especially I get that when, like I have the gouache brush. I mean, it feels like I'm pushing paint. I love it. It's really awesome. I enjoy this so much. Yeah, so I can get carried away just painting in here. It's really awesome. I love it. If you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's really great. Like I said, I use it for if I do cartoony characters like this. I like to use it for that. Or let me switch back over. Or if I want to do just some loose, quick quick studies, sketches, paintings like this. Love it. Really great. Highly recommend it. All right.
Well, we're on the 2D tools. Let's see. A couple questions. Chillin Z33 is asking, what about GIMP? What are your thoughts on GIMP as a tool?
I have to admit, I haven't tried it yet. That's like one of the few I haven't tried yet. I tried like Coral Paint. I tried Affinity. I've tried what else? Sketchbook, I think. I haven't tried GIMP. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that. But I mean, I think the thing I'll say is like, if it works for you, then shoot, go for it. It's free as far as I remember, right? So yeah, go for it. Use it.
Well, and you're getting me excited about Clip Studio Paint. I have it. A friend of mine who works in animation recommended it a while back when they were having a sale, which it gets super affordable. I think they cut it like by 50%. But I haven't really dabbled in it very much, but I think I know what I'm doing tonight after the stream.
Yeah, you should. It's just the brush. It feels like literally like butter. It feels so good. And it's just like, yeah. And I love the traditional quality of it. Like I really like, it's so good. So good. I love it.
Cool.
All right. Any other questions?
This was a question a little bit more related to previously, but Imunya is asking, how long typically does it take the kind of project that you were showing us earlier for you from start to finish?
Well, so the first project I talked about, the little robot that crashed, that was, it's hard to judge because again, it's projects I do outside of work, so it's whenever I have time for it. That one I think probably took that one honestly, because I was in and out. I would say 2 months. Yeah, it's a bad assessment just because I had a lot of things going on during that time, so I just tried to squeeze it in whenever I could. The reactor, that was a lot faster. I think that was I did the modeling in a week, and then the final thing also in a week, so 2 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think the last 2D tool question that's come in is we've got All That Jazz 4 is asking, I love these names from the chat, by the way. What do you think about Procreate for iPad? Have you messed around with that at all?
No, and this is why I have to say I am an Android person. I am, I'm not. I don't have an iPad. I switched from Apple many years ago. So I'm a non-Apple person, if I can say that.
3D has a tendency to do that, right? Like I know that the more I got into 3D, I switched over to PC just because of the bang that you get for your buck when it comes to the hardware.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, from what I've seen, though, you can do a lot of awesome things with Procreate. So I think it's from what I've seen, people do amazing things. So I think it's probably very good. I just personally haven't tried it yet. And when it comes to like, I have a Samsung Galaxy Tab. I use Artflow. That's the one I like to use for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So we're still on 2D tools, and we're actually going to talk about Blender now. And actually, I want to ask the chat a question. Do any of you guys use Blender? See if I can get any responses.
The chat has to say. I know that I use Blender.
Okay, cool.
Was it Yama Uribev was the person that got me into Blender, watching some of his tutorials and things that he's put out on Gumroad.
So then you might be familiar with Grease Pencil because that's about what I'm about to talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Yep. All right. So we have. Looks like we have a mixed.
Yeah.
Mixed response. All right. Cool. All right, sweet. All right, cool. Well, then people might actually know what I'm about to talk about, because I'm going to talk about Grease Pencil. And Grease Pencil is pretty cool. And I'm just going to erase that real quick. And I'm just going to show you, in case for the people that don't know Grease Pencil. That is not what I meant to do. There we go. It's always the hard part. There we go. All right. So I'm just going to create. So I'm in Blender. I'm in the 2D animation space. I switched over to solid view. I'm going to go into just a side view here. And I'm going to create. I'm just going to object mode. And I'm just going to run through this quickly because I just wanted to show you the Grease Pencil aspect of this. And then when we jump to 3D tools next, I'll talk a little bit more about Blender and how I like to use it and why. And some of the nice features and why I sort of decided to switch for personal use at home. And like I mentioned before earlier, studios are taking note of it. They are seeing there is a huge benefit for studios as well, obviously. The price tag is a big factor for everybody. Whether you're a freelancer at home or whether you're a studio, everybody has to kind of keep an eye on the costs. So people are noticing it. More money is being invested in it. From a studio side. So it is very up and coming, and everybody in the industry is sort of watching it. If they haven't made the step, if they haven't made the switch to it, or if they haven't tried it out yet, I do think, personally, it will happen more and more as Blender becomes more stable and is more widely used. But yeah, so let's go back to Grease Pencil real quick. So those were just a couple of thoughts on my thoughts on Blender and how it is in the industry. I'm going to create this real quick. We're going to go into draw mode for it, and I'm just going to create a material so you can actually see what I'm doing. And I can basically draw in 2D, but yet it's in 3D, which is really cool. If you think about it, that can give you a lot of, there's a lot of things you can do with it. You can sketch in 2D, do an orthographic sketch if you want to. You can also try to sketch in 3D. We'll talk about that in just a second. But this offers you a lot of opportunities, a lot of things you can do. I can erase this. I can erase the stroke if I want to. I can also, let me actually go back into, you can change the material to a fill. And now I essentially have a lasso tool, and I can start doing a weird hover bike design. Yeah, so things like that. Really cool tool. There's a lot of things. Like I said, this is not a Blender class. This is not a grease pencil tutorial. So I just want to show you a couple of the things, why I think it's awesome, why I think it's cool. It's helpful. You have these features over here, which, hello. If you want to have a really nice, if you're like me and you like to have really nice, precise lines, you can use this tool. You can also, if we go back to our pencil, you can change the stroke. Right now I'm in the draw pencil. There are different options in here. You can have this draw noise, so that gives you a little bit more of an interrupted thing. So you can really go to town, and like I said, there are many tutorials out there that you can watch. There's a lot of things you can do with this. You can stabilize your stroke. If you really want to have a nice stable stroke, like I just talked about, because I naturally personally don't, so I need that. It's a good tool for me. Those are all the kind of things you can do with this. And then there are things after this that you can convert this into a curve. You can convert this into a polygon edge. You can clean it up, and you can create a 3D model out of it. It's awesome. It's really handy. It's this weird sort of in between 2D and 3D that just gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of opportunities and things you can do with it. It's really awesome. Let's see. Now, how I like to generally use it, I actually like to start off with just a very basic modeling shape. Nothing crazy. I'm just doing something here. Weird, I don't know, whatever. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. But now we're going to go create a new grease pencil. And I'm going to go back into drawing mode. And I can select to draw on the surface. And I can select the offset from the surface. So let's just go a little bit closer in. I can also select which side I want to use. The side obviously corresponds to my axes over here, which I can see in the viewport here. And then I can, let me give a material so you can actually see what I'm doing. And then I can paint, I can draw on this, and you'll see it's actually on the model itself. So that's just a nice way of, not going too crazy. Because I found when I don't do this on a surface, my strokes can sometimes just go all over the place because you are drawing in 3D. So it can sometimes get a little bit confusing. There are some tools for it that help with it. I just still prefer just having a base mesh and then I just draw on top of it. All right. I think that's all I want to say about grease pencil before I get too much carried away into that. So that's grease pencil. And actually, that's sort of what I did for this guy here. You can see my very messy strokes over here, and then the final concept on this side. So it's fun. It's great for iterations. There's also a random transform that you can do, so you can offset things. You can come up with different shapes. So many things you can do. Anyway, it's cool. Try it out if you haven't. Have you tried it yet, Adam?
I've tried just a little bit of grease pencil. I'm kind of torn right now between what grease pencil can do and what I can do in Gravity Sketch in VR. It's kind of a similar thing.
Yes.
And I'm still trying to figure out which workflow I enjoy more, or which one's better for what purposes.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, yep. That's the one thing I haven't really gotten into too much. It's the Gravity Sketch and sketching in VR. My other half, he likes to do that. He's very good at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that Yama has a really cool tutorial of doing exactly what you were just showing us, which is starting with primitive shapes and then binding the stroke to the surface of the shape and just designing on top. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's my preferred way of doing it, just because you have a more control over the stroke and everything and where it ends up. So yeah.
Well, and you could do a lot more in Blender than you can do in Gravity Sketch as well when it comes to all the other things. Yeah.
So it's always like there's so many options. It's like, which one is it? Sometimes it comes down to like what feels good to you.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's talk 3D. And since we started talking about Blender, we're going to continue talking about Blender. Just for a little bit.
Is it okay
Yeah.
while we're transitioning that if I bring up a couple questions that came up?
Yeah, of course.
Oriented towards the 2D section in Blender. Dust Star from the stream asked, how would you suggest learning Blender and transitioning from being a 2D artist to a 3D artist?
So I like to take classes, to be honest. I know there's a lot of online tutorials. There's so many YouTube channels that you can watch. I personally just like to, I just like to take a class because then I have a teacher I can ask questions to. For me personally, I think that's just the fastest way to learn it. That's what I did when I switched over to real time. When I started to get into Unreal, just taking a class is easy.
And I think that's all of the questions from that session. I've got a few 3D oriented questions towards Blender that have come in, but I think I'll wait until you've sort of covered that.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's see what I cover, because like I said, we'll see how that goes. Let's see. All right, so let's talk about Blender. Let's go back. Let's just create a new scene real quick. All right, so the reason why I like Blender is that it has sped up my workflow tremendously. I used to, I learned on Maya. I work with 3ds Max. I did a little bit of Modo at a certain time, and I thought Modo was really, really good. But Blender has really made modeling fun for me. And I'm actually somebody who, funny enough, I actually don't like modeling that much. For me, modeling is like something, it's a necessary step that I have to take to get to what I want, which is the final image. But Blender has changed that. It's really weird. It's cool, but it's a lot of fun. And actually, in Blender, there's a lot of things you can do. And I'm just going to show you a couple of things. I think one of the big things that has increased my workflow is obviously hotkeys. And yes, I know you have those in 3ds Max and you have those in Maya as well. But there's something about the hotkeys here that just feel really, really fluid. Now, the configuration that I use, I actually use it from Heavy Poly, from Von Ling. So a quick little shout out to him. He is awesome. And I use his configuration because it's really nice. It's really good. It's very intuitive. So if you see me using certain things that don't look like out-of-the-box Blender, that's because they're probably not. They're probably from his configuration. So quick little disclaimer on that side. But yeah, so the reason why I like, obviously we have the hotbox here, and I can quickly switch over. And it's simple things. It's things like this. As soon as I drag a selection box over a vertex, it goes into X-ray mode, and I can see exactly what I'm selecting, and I can make sure I don't select the vertex behind it. Again, some software do this as well. Blender just does this and other things really well, and that's why I like to use it. Not saying that the other software is not good, not saying that you can't do this with other software. Again, this is just my personal preferences, my personal opinion at home. I like this, I feel comfortable in it, and that's pretty much it. So I'm not trying to downplay Maya, I'm not trying to downplay any of the other softwares. They're all really, really good. I just happen to like this for my personal projects at home. It's fun. And actually, even sometimes at work, I like to use it. So yeah. So that's just, again, simple things, just the X-ray selection. But then you can also go, it's very fluid, all hotkey driven. I can very quickly bevel things. I can scale things. I can do all kinds of things with this really, really quickly. And I mean, this is all just hotkey driven, right? There's nothing else to it. There's no me going to another hotbox menu to another thing. It's all right here in the and it's all here in my hotkeys, all in one hand. I don't even need to move around all that much, and that speeds up the workflow a lot. So that's just one of the reasons why I like to use it. Let's see, the other thing that I like to do, let's just create cube. Cylinder. And this is magic. And if you've been doing 3D for a long time, this is going to blow your mind right now. And let me maybe switch over so you can see this a little bit better. This right here, holy shit! Like, again, if you've been doing 3D for a long time, live booleans are amazing. They're absolutely awesome. I can come in here. I can I can add an edge loop and scale that up, and my boolean will update. I can move it around. I can do all these different things. That is so powerful. If you do something and then your art director comes back and he's like, hey, I want you to change this, I want you to change that. You're like, sure, cool, no problem. He wants you to, move that hole a little bit further over there. I'm like, yeah, 1 second, done. Before that would take forever. You'd have to go back, change your UVs. You have to, you have to clean up the mesh. You have to re-topologize everything. Move it over, done. Cool, everybody's happy. Let's move on. This is super powerful. I can't stress this enough. This is so cool. Yeah, I'm super happy about this. Let's see. What else can I talk about? So that's live booleans. Let me show you another thing that I like to use a lot. And like I said, this is not a Blender class, so I don't want to get too involved on any of this stuff. I just want to show you some of the things, and then if you're not familiar with it, I'll leave you to explore it further. But I'm just gonna add a plane on top here. Subdivide this a few times. And then I'm going to...
I know where you're going with this.
Shrink wrap? Yeah,
Yes.
I love shrink wrap. It's amazing. So I'm just going to create this, and now I'm going to shrink wrap my plane to that. There are different options to this that you can do. You can give it an offset. And then you can move it around. Sometimes it breaks. If you're careful with it, you can get some pretty cool effects out of it. And this is great if you want to apply decals to your scene, to your mesh. If you want to add, text, images, any of those things. This is pretty awesome. So I use this a lot. Yes, Adam?
I've got a question that's not from the chat, it's from me. What you're doing right now with the shrink wrap, could you be using that sphere as a live boolean and then just get kind of like that curvature to the plane?
You should be able to.
Try doing it?
That'd be cool. Okay. Yeah, you should be able to. I mean, you can layer these things as you go. And obviously, you can always, once you're happy with it, you can bake everything down. So you should be able to do that. I haven't tried it, but you should be able to do that.
No, I'm watching you do that. I think you just solved a problem.
Well, good. Awesome.
I do have a few backlogged questions from the chat if you want to do that now.
Yeah, cool. Let's go for it.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. So we got a few Blender questions that have come in. All right. First question is from the Matt Bat. What are your thoughts on sculpting in Blender compared to ZBrush?
I was going to talk about sculpting a little bit. So now, also, I should say I don't sculpt that much. So I actually, I find I don't use ZBrush that much anymore. I just don't have to. I'm usually more of a architecture kind of person, apparently. Who would have thunk? But I think it's good. I think it's not as good yet. There's some things that are really amazing about sculpting in Blender. The reason why I do like to do it, if I have to do some basic sculpting, nothing too crazy, is because it's the ability to switch back and forth between traditional polygon modeling and sculpting. That is a super convenient workflow for me. It's something that I'm very comfortable in. I'm much more comfortable with that than I am just sculpting. Obviously, if you talk to somebody like Josh or some of my other friends who do sculpting on a daily basis, they're obviously much more comfortable with that than somebody who's like me. I'm in ZBrush maybe once every 2 or 3 months. So I think it just depends on your own personal comfort level and what you're trying to do. So for me, the combination of doing some quick sculpting for a ground in Blender makes a lot more sense to me personally than to now export everything out, go into ZBrush, do a really nice sculpt there, then bring everything back in. It just slows me down too much. So that's my personal opinion on that. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, and then Chillin Z33 wanted to know when you talked about taking classes for learning Blender. They're asking what classes did you take and where?
Yeah, I mean, there's also so many places you can take classes. Obviously, I took classes at Gnomon. Then I took classes and I also teach actually at CGMA, CGMA Online. And then I mentioned Von Ling, Heavy Poly. So he has a Blender class, so I took that one as well. So those are a couple of the places where I took classes. But there's so many classes. I mean, there's so many places. I think Gnomon has online classes as well, right? Do you guys have that?
That's right.
Yeah. But are they still only for US?
To take an individual online class is going to be for California residents, and then also overseas.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
So it's more of a restriction between being in California and outside of California in the US. But if you are overseas, you can take an individual online class at Gnomon. And the cool thing right now is that because our entire term is online, because of social distancing, we've got a really great online platform. All of our individual classes are now being offered online.
Okay, that's crazy cool. That's crazy cool.
Yeah.
Because when I first started taking things online, like it wasn't, I know it wasn't quite there yet. So this is super cool to hear. So yeah, plenty of options for you guys to take classes. And
absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. Other questions?
Let's see. Yeah, I think the last one I've got right now is from Scooter X, and it's oriented towards the live Boolean you were showing us. And I'm hope that I'm understanding the question correctly. They're wanting to know what the top surface of the cube looks like now that you've done a Boolean.
Yes, surprisingly and shockingly good. Let me see if I can just show you quick. So far I found that in most cases, it actually does a really good job. It's similar to Modo in that regard, that the topology actually looks really nice, meaning it's not, it just gives you one phase, maybe two, if it feels it needs to add an extra edge loop for support. But it's not crazy triangulated or anything like that, if that's what you're asking. So it's still very nice and manageable. Let me just try to do that real quick. Let me just go into this one here. Let me just do a live subtract. And now for me to actually be able to see what the topology looks like, I do need to apply the modifier to the mesh. So let's apply, let's hide, and let's go into edge mode. Okay. You see, it's still super clean. I can still very easily work with it. I can select the faces and I can do different things with it. So I hope that sort of answers the question. But yeah.
Yeah. And the last question right now is from me. You're doing a lot of work in Unreal Engine. So are you creating a lot of assets in Blender and then just importing them into Unreal Engine and working it that way? Or?
Yep, pretty much.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's the next big thing that I want to start learning is Unreal.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. Obviously at work, usually a lot of studios have their own proprietary engines. So it's usually, sometimes it's Unreal, but there's also proprietary engines. But yeah, but usually those are mostly based on an FBX pipeline. So studios tend to be pretty flexible in what kind of software you work beforehand. And again, since Blender is free, they usually don't have any concerns or any objections to using it, which is nice.
Very cool. All right. Well, that takes care of all the questions from the chat at the moment. And guys, feel free to keep typing your questions into the chat. It's working really well as we're kind of gathering questions there, and we're able to ask Sonja as she's going through her presentation. So let's keep going.
Yeah, and actually, like I said, this is not supposed to be a Blender class. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm just gonna show you one other thing that I think is kind of cool and a little bit unique to Blender. And that is actually if I go into sub D modeling. And now let's see, I want to make some changes to it. You can see, I see the original unsmoothed mesh out here. So I can see the cage preview basically in a way. So that's kind of cool, just because it kind of tells you, if I just go out of it, you can see this is my shape now. This is what it looks like a smooth preview, and I can still see the shape out here. So that's kind of cool. Just kind of keeps you, you can see where you add your edge loops. And I just personally find that just a nice little feature I can see sort of what I'm doing. And I don't know what shape I'm doing right now. This is weird. Okay, but anyways, you get my point. That's the idea. It's a nice little thing. I like seeing that preview. Let's see what else. We did talk about sculpting briefly. I just want to show you one thing, if I can. Give me 1 second. Let's just create a plane. Hello. Oh, wrong one. Let's just subdivide this a couple times. Yeah, let's go crazy. Oh god, I hope I didn't crash it. I may have crashed it. So let's wait 1 second. Nope, here we go. Well, let's see. It might have crashed. Let me start up a new one. All right, maybe I shouldn't subdivide quite as much or quite as fast. Let's go into sculpt. Let's go into sculpting mode. So you can see there's a lot of similar tools. The only thing I kind of want to talk about is the cloth brush. We also have symmetry. Let me just turn that off. Let me turn this to the different modes for this brush. Wait, can you see this? I mean, that's pretty cool. So it's a cloth simulation in a brush. You can, there are different modes for it. It's great for pillows and for blankets. So many cool things you can do with this. You can change the strength. You can change the radius. Many different options. But this is crazy cool. You get basically instant folds. And for somebody who's not a character artist, trust me, I am super happy about this because this speeds up my workflow so much. No idea. You can use this also for wrinkles, not just for for clothes. There's a lot of different things you can do with this, and I think this is crazy cool. It's relatively new, so this is absolutely awesome. So, highly recommend this. If you're not familiar with Blender, like I said, I was skeptical at first, but then the more stuff I saw, I'm like, all right, maybe I should give it a try too. And then I kind of fell in love with it. So I get it if you're skeptical, if you're like, I'd rather stick to Maya and 3ds Max. I get it. I totally get it. I'm not saying they're not great tools. They are. But there's some pretty cool things in Blender that just might speed up your workflow a little bit and also kind of make it a little bit more fun. Because I feel like I spend more time focusing on the creative aspects now and less on the technical. So I really get to be more of an artist, and that's kind of what I enjoy about it. So hopefully that answers some of your questions, because I know this is a hot topic. Everybody's talking about it at the moment. But yeah, hopefully that kind of helps you. It's my take on the situation. So please take it as that, and then try it for yourself and form your own opinion on it. Sound good? Oh,
yeah.
Cool. All right, so that's enough about Blender. Let's move on. Let's talk about Substance Designer and Substance Painter. They are absolutely awesome. There's obviously also Mari out there for heavy VFX pipeline. If you have gazillions of UDIMs you need to deal with, obviously Mari is an amazing tool for that. But for personal projects at home, I rarely do anything that complex. Like I said, I'm an environment person. I try to be smart. I try to be fast. So I like to use Substance Painter and Substance Designer. They're great. Substance Painter, we talked about it briefly before. What I like about Substance Painter is that I can do things like this, which is more stylized, still procedural, and then with some personal touches on top. But this is still mostly done procedurally, and that's cool. I can do something photorealistic. There's so many things I can do with it. So that's why I like to use it. Substance Designer, holy shit, it's awesome. Wait, can I actually say that? Sorry, am I allowed to say the S word on here? I hope so.
Yeah, I think you're okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm like, holy, I don't know. Yeah, anyway,
my producers will let me know any second. Just keep going.
Sounds good. Sorry.
No, you're okay.
Yeah, so it's great. This was I did a tire tread in Substance Designer all from scratch. It's so much fun. It's flexible. You can do so many things with it. If you need to quickly make changes, you can do that. It's absolutely awesome. I love it. This was the final output for it. This was the tire in a scene, and I also used it in the little robot scene that you saw earlier. For that version, I just turned off the pebbles because I didn't want those. So it's so flexible. You can do so many things with it. It's just absolutely amazing. I use it a lot if I can. But having said that, we also have Quixel Mega Scans and Substance Source. And these are amazing resources, and I use them a lot, especially if I don't have a lot of time, or my goal is maybe not necessarily to get better at Substance Designer. Then I will definitely go on these two websites first to check if there is a tileable material that I can just use to start as a base and then maybe modify on top of that. It's a time saver. It just saves time. I don't need to spend too much tweaking or too many. If I don't need to do too many things to it, it's just a good starting point to speed up my process. So they're awesome. Studios use them as well, so it's good to get familiar with them. It's a great resource. So when you do your personal projects, be smart, use your resources. As long as you can, if you use them for your portfolio, though, make sure that you also demonstrate in your portfolio that you know how to do these assets yourself. That's very important, because otherwise, that's going to be the first questions that a recruiter might, or like an artist will probably ask you. Oh, so you didn't do this yourself. Then you want to be able to be like, yeah, not for this, but for this project I did, and this is what it looks like. That's kind of how you want to end that conversation. You want to prove that you know how to do this, but because you wanted to be efficient with your time, you prioritized and focused on something else for this project. So just a little portfolio tip there, because that question will come up. I've asked that question in interviews, so make sure you have an answer ready for it. Let's see. And let's talk about ray tracing. Let's talk about ray tracing. Let's talk about 3ds Max. Let's talk about V-Ray. And I talked a little bit about this already. The reason why I like this combination in particular is, let's start with why 3ds Max. That's a good question. Because, like I said, I come from Maya. I didn't really like 3ds Max, if I can say that. But I came to kind of like it. And the reason for that is honestly these two things right here, and the material editor. I will say that I love the material editor. It's easy, it's very clean. So I like that one. I prefer that over the Hypershade in Maya. Let's talk about. I just want to show you just the website for Forest Pack. If you're not familiar with it, Forest Pack is a scattering tool for 3ds Max, and it's amazing. It's one of the best scattering tools, honestly, I've seen still, and I've been using this for years. What's so great about it? Let me see if this video plays. What's so great about it is, it does have sound.
We may not get the audio from the video.
That's
I'm
good.
not sure, though.
We don't need the audio anyways. And actually,
okay.
I can't even see where the button for this thing is. Oh, anyway. So hopefully there's no sound, because that's kind of just annoying. What's so great about it is that you have a lot of control over it. You can decide on patterns. You can see that here, this is a dense pattern. You can change this to different image maps. You do custom image maps, and that will determine your scattering. You can paint areas where you want the scattering to be. You have a point cloud preview. You can change this to boxes or pyramids, whatever you want to do. Especially the painting aspect, I like a lot, that I can literally go in and paint where I want scattering to be, where I don't want scattering to be. I can specify what elements I want to be in that scatter area that I just painted. So I can, it's you can set up collisions. You could set up if you have a slope. You can specify at what normal degree you want the assets to be scattered in. So much functionality, so much control. Obviously, randomizing transformation, scale, rotate, transform, all of that is in there. Collision is in there if you don't want things to collide too much with each other. All of that is in there. So Forest Pack is it's really, really powerful. Like I said, I've used it at work for many years. I use it at home whenever I need to scatter something, unless I'm in Unreal, of course. But it's really, really powerful. You can see you can do it based on camera angles. So you can limit the scattering to only what you see in the camera, which is crazy good. Yeah, I mean, we can keep talking. You can add, you can see here, you can change, you can give it color differences based on an image map or on a custom thing. So many parameters. It's a scattering tool on steroids. It's amazing what it can do. So it's honestly probably one of my major selling points on using 3ds Max is the scattering tool. It's amazing. So that's one of them. The other thing is Reactor, and I talked about it before. If you remember back the Reactor scene, and this is it. So basically, it's just something you add to your materials, and it adds procedural, realistic looking dirt to it. It has different presets, different options. It only exists, as far as I know, for now, for 3ds Max and V-Ray. So that's why I like to use it. Like I said, if we go back to the Reactor scene, that's the only thing I did on top of a tileable texture to break it up and to give it that, to ground it and make it feel more realistic. So, Reactor, Forest Pack, they're awesome. If you're not familiar with it, check them out. And they're the reason why I'm in 3ds Max. Yep, believe it or not. And then, so that's why I'm in 3ds Max. And then let's talk about V-Ray. And V-Ray is awesome. Like I mentioned before, I've used it at work. I use it at home. I like that I can do many different things with it. I can do something that's more physical based. I can do something that's more artificial. That's a little bit, well, not artificial. That's more art directed. Let's say it that way. I can do something stylized. I can do VDB clouds. These clouds, for example, I did in Houdini, and then I brought them over into 3ds Max and V-Ray and rendered them there. So many things, so many options. It's fast. It's good. It hasn't failed me yet. So that's my preferred combination for doing anything ray tracing related. Again, I'm not saying that the other renders are not good. This is just my preferred choice if I have to pick a single one to do my work in. Octane, Redshift, Arnold, they're all good. I'm not saying that. This is just my preference. Any questions on that?
We've had one that's come in from, let's see, Chillax D. What are the pros and cons of real-time lighting like in Unreal versus rendering a shot in something like Blender or 3ds Max or something like that?
So I guess it depends on whether you want ray tracing, whether you want the additional bounce lights, or whether you just want something that just something real time. There's no good answer for that question because it really depends on the project and what you're looking for. So it's, if you have a limited amount of time, then real time is probably your way to go. If you have a little bit more time and you want something that's really photoreal, that has a lot of bounce and a lot of light scattering all over the place, then ray tracing is still your best bet. So I think it really depends. There's not a single solution for everything. It really depends on your time and what you're looking for and what you're trying to achieve, and sort of like a balance of the three, I would say.
And what do you think of, now Unreal is really pushing the boundaries.
Oh yeah.
We've seen Unreal used in The Mandalorian. We're now seeing virtual sets and things like that. And now Unreal 5, which we've kind of gotten a teaser for. Can you talk a little bit about what you think about where things might be going?
Well, I mean, that's the reason why I learned game engines a long time ago, is because I saw the technical like the advancements that were being made in game engines, and I noticed that games were starting to look better and better, and I'm like, wait, this is real time? All right, I need to figure out how they're doing this. I need to learn this, because if it's starting to look this good, it's just going to keep getting better and better. And this is exactly what's happening now with Unreal 5. And I'm like, before we know it, I mean, and this is actually a super exciting time right now to be an artist, because that line is getting blurred heavily. And if Unreal 5 really does deliver on everything that they're promising, that's going to be a game changer. That's going to be huge. I'm so excited for it. Actually, a lot of my colleagues from ILM are over actually at Epic now, so they actually worked on the demo, which is super cool. So excited to see their work. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be so awesome. I literally cannot wait. It's yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how VFX pipelines start to adapt to it. So that'll be interesting. I think I think the ones like I said, I was at ILM Lab, so we were starting to work on this, and we're starting to incorporate, and we started to cross over already at that time. So it's the Mandalorian came pretty much right after it. So it's really exciting to see them already taking that step and exploring how you can push the boundary and how we can incorporate this new technology and use it in a different setting. I think it's super exciting. Yeah, I can't wait. It's gonna be awesome.
Yes, and it's amazing how it's come full circle now, because now we're using digital real time to essentially create a real in-camera set.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mind-blowing.
Yes, and also,
for sure.
I mean, just the flexibility and the opportunities it gives to directors as well it's just going to be incredible. I think it's like I said, if it is everything it's promising to be, and if people are starting to develop tools for it more and more and getting into the mindset of it, I think it can revolutionize. It could potentially revolutionize the film industry, sort of, and filmmaking as we know it, which is that's super exciting. That doesn't happen that often. So that's why I say it's a very exciting time to be an artist. Yeah, like I said, it wasn't that long ago. Okay, maybe a couple years ago, but when I still had to paint normal maps in Photoshop from scratch. I mean, how far have we come in such a short time? It's incredible. Yeah, the future is amazing. I can't wait.
Very exciting indeed. Den Rush from the chat wants to know if you've used Clarice, and if so, what are your thoughts on it?
I did. We actually, I actually tested it on Doctor Strange, because it was being used on another project at the same time. So I tested it out, and it's honestly, it's great. It's it's one of the only softwares, except for maybe Unreal 5 now, that can handle that many polygons so fluidly. It's a great tool. It's amazing, especially for large, heavy polygon scenes. But like I said, if Unreal 5 can do that too, we'll see. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
Absolutely, in real time. Yeah. Someone piped in on the chat on something that I was thinking of earlier when you're talking about V-Ray versus rendering in Blender and whatnot. I've heard of, and let's see, Speak Thunder's mentioned in the chat, V-Ray has a Blender plugin. Have you messed around with that much?
Yeah, last time I checked, I think it was still for 2.79. So I'm on 9, I think, at this point. Yeah, so no, honestly, I haven't. I'm kind of waiting for it. I'm hoping the guys will get something out for 2.8 or 2.9, wherever we are. Blender comes out with so many new versions. It's sometimes just a mission to keep up with that.
Oh yes. All right. Well, we're all caught up on our question backlog, and we can continue going forward with you.
Cool. I mean, honestly, I don't have that much left, because this covers like my ray tracing renders and choice. And really now I was just going to talk a little bit about real time, which we sort of already did in a way. So yeah, when it comes to real time, I like Unreal and I like Evee for Blender. They're both really, really great. How to choose between the two? Honestly, for me right now, it just depends on the project, how big it is, what I want to do with it. For right now, I still prefer to use Unreal for slightly bigger scenes, slightly more involved scenes, like this little guy, which I showed you earlier, and then smaller, slightly smaller, quicker, more like concept related things, more exploration related things. Those I like to do in Blender and Eevee because it's fast, it's convenient. I get to play with things. Here I did some toon shading experiments, things like that. So there's really, like I said, no right or wrong answer, just kind of like a preference. But for right now, that seems to be my preference. It could change. Eevee keeps getting better and better, and I'm actually using it for. I used it for a freelance project as well. So you never know. You never know. It just kind of depends on what feels good, what feels right, what do I think saves me time, and that's really what it comes down to. But yeah, I think that's actually wraps up what I had to say.
Okay.
So yeah, if there are any other questions.
Yeah, so folks, we got a little bit more time. So if you got any like questions you want to get in there, we actually have time to address those. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about Unreal. I think it's a lot of people who are really experienced with something like Blender.
Uh-huh.
They're using it for free, but Unreal's getting so much attention right now.
Yes.
With all these recent developments and stuff. I think there's a lot of people who are out there that are curious about it, and they're starting to realize that this is a tool for more than just people building levels for games.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also, especially with VR, it's actually now also being heavily used or starting to be used in architecture, which is really interesting. So you
Okay.
think about that, you can actually, especially again with combination of VR, you can put a client into a VR headset and they can literally walk around the space and like literally feel what it's going to feel like when it's built. And think about that. I mean, that's incredible. That's an incredible combination that wasn't doable just several years ago. So it's really starting to develop as a really powerful tool across multiple industries. And architecture and ArchViz is just one of those examples. I saw a talk from was it Zaha Hadid's architecture, and they talked about how they used it and how they use VR for their clients to really help them visualize and bring their vision to fruition. That rhymes. But yeah, so it's really interesting to see that because I wasn't even aware of that until then. So talking to the guys and finding out more about it was really cool. So that's also, that industry is going through a big change right now as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where would you suggest, especially for people who everyone's at home right now, aside from, of course, taking an individual course at Gnomon or other educational institutions, where would you suggest going, say for tutorials and things like that on Unreal Engine?
Actually, the Unreal, like the Epic guys, actually themselves, they have a great website with a lot of resources there. So you can just literally just go right there, download it, start playing around with it. It's also free, so you can do that. There are marketplace scenes, so you can download example files. You can dissect them and analyze them. So there's so many resources out there. But I would probably start there. Besides taking a class, like I said, I like the structure of a class. I like that I can ask questions. I don't need to spend hours online trying to get the answer. So I personally it's a personal preference. I think it speeds up, for me, my workflow and my learning process.
Yeah.
And you get to meet more.
We've got a right. Yeah, that is very important to being in a class. We've got a question that's come in from All That Jazz 4, and they're wanting to know your thoughts on Houdini effects and whether you've tried adding that to your arsenal.
Houdini is awesome. Houdini is great. If you want to be an FX TD, yes, that's you should know Houdini. I've worked in Houdini with usually just clouds. Environment artist, you do clouds, map painter especially. So I've mostly used it for that. I've done some rigid body simulations in Houdini as well. I wanted to get in more into procedural modeling. I just haven't had the time. There's only so much time in the day, and I just haven't gotten around to it just yet. But it's high on my list. It's great. We use similar technology. Actually in the Snowdrop engine on the Division 2. It's basically how we built our buildings. You can see it in some, I think, one of the GDC talks that they did. It's a spline-based tool for creating buildings, and then you can just swap out the building tiles, and you can really quickly generate cities. So it's incredibly powerful. It's high on my list to do.
Mm-hmm.
Just have to get around to it.
So if we've got, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in from the chat at this point. Something that whenever I'm able to be with a guest, I like to ask them to address, and that is because on these kind of events, of course, we have a lot of industry people tuning in who are already very well familiar with everything that you're talking about. But then there are those that are looking at all of this, and to them, it's still magic. It's still, a mystery. But it's something they're very interested in. They're kind of looking in as a beginner. What would you have to say an aspiring artist that's looked at the kind of stuff that you're doing tonight and has had that aha moment, and they're like, wow, this is what I would like to do. I want to do what Sonja's doing. What would you have to say to someone who either maybe is in community college right now, thinking about a career, or maybe even finishing high school at this point? What would be a great way to get off on the right footing and how to pursue what you're doing?
I think it's similar to what we talked about earlier. It's look at tutorials. Maybe find an artist that inspires you. Kind of track them. Maybe even just reach out to them and ask them for, like, how did you get to where you are? Artists are generally very friendly people, and they're happy to help you out. It might just take a little bit more time to get back to. Might take a little time for them to get back to you if they're really busy. But approach artists. Approach people that inspire you. Maybe you get a response, maybe you don't, but you won't know until you try. And then, let's look online. There's so many resources. Depending on where you are, look towards schools, look to see if there are any classes that are being offered that you can start taking. And then just start getting into it. Just start doing it. Just start doing art. Start drawing. Start sketching. Start painting. Traditional skills are still very, very important, even if you're a 3D artist. It's if you remember back to what I talked about when I do my lighting, it's based on the traditional art foundation. It's making sure that your values work. So everything is based on those fundamental skills, whether you're a 3D artist, whether you're a technical artist, it's still based on an understanding of the world, of, material qualities, all those things, on physics. No matter what you do, it's all based on that. So whatever it is that you want to do, start with those foundations and then just keep building from there.
Yeah, absolutely. You sound like someone who has had an education at Gnomon, for sure. That is what we stress, for sure. Sonja, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. I learned a ton just listening to you share. I so appreciate your enthusiasm, not just for the work, but also for the tools. I think that was incredibly informative, and I think it's just fun to share your passion for what you do. So thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it was helpful. So, and it was really nice being here.
Very much.
And
yes, very much so.
I'm going to take a nap now because I'm tired.
Yes, thank you for waking up so early for us today. Appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah, and just finishing up, I'll mention, Gnomon's come up a few times in the event today. For those of you who may not be familiar, Gnomon is a 3D art school in Hollywood, and we train artists for careers in visual effects, games, and animation. We have regular programming right here on our Twitch feed, ranging from events like this one tonight to an art jam that our Chief Creative Officer, Josh Herman, has every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. Josh is he's a veteran industry artist. He's worked for Marvel. He's worked with Cloud Imperium Games, Naughty Dog. And it's a really, really fun time where he's getting on, working in ZBrush, showing his workflow and what he does. And as I mentioned earlier at the top of the stream, our entire summer term is going to be offered through our online platform. So there's never been a better time to take an individual class at Gnomon online. And even if you're considering something like our full-time program, you can actually get started in the summer, from where you are in that program. So there's really the best way to do that is just get in touch with the school, get in touch with admissions. We can put a link in the chat tonight for any of you who are interested. We've got a place where you can provide some information. But I would like to mention with regards to individual classes, especially for industry artists, we work with the Employment Training Panel of the state of California. So that means if you're an industry artist in California, you have the opportunity to take individual classes at Gnomon cost-free through this program. And if you don't know whether your studio is already in agreement with that program or working with it, or you'd like to find out how to get in on that as an industry artist working in a studio in California, the process is super simple. You don't even have to be working at a big studio or in a high level position. All you need to do is to just reach out to us. You can even reach out to the link that my colleague is putting in on the chat, and you can mention that you're interested in ETP. And lastly, if you're a union member who has a CSATF, those of you out there who are, you know what that means. Gnomon is on the approved schools list. So there's an open door for you as well. So I just wanted to mention those things with all the talk about tools tonight, about workflows, about the value that Sonja's putting on actually getting the right training. These are some amazing doors that are open presently for both aspiring artists and industry artists. So thank you again. We hope to see you guys again on our Twitch stream for future content and streams for artists. So thank you.